And now I would like to introduce Stephen Lambert, who's the COO of Spacewell. Stephen?
All right, thank you, Derek. So yes, my name is Stephen Lambert. I'm with Spacewell. We are a technology company based out of Europe, but active all over the world in PropTech. Today I'm very excited to share some of our experiences with the digital twin. We really feel like this concept that has been very hyped over the last few years is really coming to life, coming to fruition in some real practical applications to really manage the entire life cycle of a building. We call it building lifecycle intelligence, which is really from design to build to manage and maintain, to leverage the digital twin as sort of the data hub where you capture all the information that's relevant, to share it across the different stages and across the different stakeholders in the building lifecycle. So let me dive in. Just by way of introduction, we're part of the Nemetschek Group, which is a originally German-based stock-quoted software company doing everything across the life cycle. So you see here some of the solutions that we have that you're maybe familiar with if you're an architect or a construction firm or a property manager, and all the different other stakeholders in the life cycle. So Spacewell is really focused on the end of the life cycle, meaning how to better manage, occupy, maintain buildings. But we're really linking it upstream into the other contributors that are really creating that digital twin to really get the most out of it, to optimize the entire life cycle. Specifically on Spacewell itself, we are a software company focused on what a lot of people call integrated workplace management, so facility management, property management, managing leases, managing work orders, managing maintenance. We also have a platform for smart buildings, which is an IoT platform called Kubundu, which is really linking sensors or BMS systems of buildings into our platform to do better monitoring, triggering, and applying artificial intelligence to it. And we also even span out into the world of energy management and even meeting room reservations. But here today, I'm going to talk about how some of these functions inherit what comes out of the design and build process, and where the digital twin can really make a groundbreaking difference in the way we prepare and manage buildings. So what is the first challenge that we have? First of all, some of you may be familiar that along the different stages of the life cycle, we have the issue of losing data at every handover moment, right? From planning to design to construction, all the way to occupying the space, maintaining the space, creating a user experience. There's a lot of data loss along the way. And that's one of the things that we try to address with the digital twin. The other one is the fact that buildings are often very underutilized and underperforming, either in the way the space is being used, in the way people can be productive or not in those buildings, and the way the well-being and compliance is being managed. And so those two challenges is really what we're here to talk about today, in the way the digital twin can make a difference. So how do we define digital twin? I know many people have probably been bombarding you with definitions around it. We really look at it at different stages of the life cycle. So first of all, you start with the building information model, right? The BIM model itself, the 3D model with all the data attached to it. But it's not just that. It's also all the master data that you surround it with, things like room numbers or suppliers or technical specs or documents that are all relevant, not just for building the building, but also managing it. And then there's the three phases that we always talk about within the Nemetschek Group. It's planning and design, build and construct, operate and manage. Nothing new there. Essentially, planning and design is really conceiving, designing, doing the structural engineering, MEP, and doing the issue management and quality control as a way to bring all these different design elements together. During construction, obviously, you're doing the scheduling and collaboration and documentation while you're doing planning and budgeting for it. And then you start making your 30-year maintenance plan for that building and budget before you start into the actual operating of it, which goes all the way from facility management, creating user experience, touch points, touch screens that users can interact with, space allocation, all the way to property management. And we enhance that with things like IoT, BMS sensors, configurable workflows, AI triggers that are all enablers to a better user experience. And all that comes together in what we call building intelligence, which goes much further than the typical kind of BI analytics that we did in buildings over the last years. So how does that really work? First of all, I talked about the asset information model. That's the digital twin itself. The single version of the truth, the real as built or as maintained model of the building, where version control is important, issue tracking is important. Secondly is that building master data that I talked about to really administer data centrally that could be relevant at some point during the life cycle, which is accessible through different ways by different stakeholders, not just the people working on the BIM authoring. And then you start designing. And what we see, for example, that's very interesting is when you start taking the digital twin model during the design phase and looking for feedback, not just between, say, structural engineers and plumbing and mechanical, but also with the future maintenance team, right? To really start thinking about the implication of your design decisions on maintenance. And that is actually something fairly new, because typically people have been dumping a BIM model over to the maintenance world, and now you can actually do it the other way around and start analyzing maintenance implications during design, which is when it's cheaper to make changes, not when the building is already built. Another one is during the construction projects. What we see a lot is things like, for example, interacting with the digital twin when you're on site. Everybody knows the planning shed that's on the construction site that used to have the big printed plans. Now it has a screen where you can access the BIM model, but it really still requires quite a lot of, I would say, IT knowledge to interact with. With the digital twin, you can really make it interactive for people who are not IT savvy, and can walk around with an iPad and really click around in the model, but more importantly, can click through the model to the underlying specs, the underlying data, the underlying documents while you're doing construction, and even capture feedback when you're seeing something that is out of whack on the construction site. Either the digital twin has an error and is not consistent with the physical building, or the physical building has been done wrong and needs to be corrected to be consistent with the design. And so that's bringing that at the fingertips of people in the field, in the construction site, can really make a big difference to either access data, underlying data that was put there by the designers, by suppliers and others, but also capture feedback on site to give back to all the different design stakeholders. That's one example of where it can be very useful during construction projects. Another one is actually the interaction with suppliers. So what we see a lot is, if you're a construction firm, you have to do tendering to different suppliers, say, of the elevators. You may have 3 potential candidate suppliers of the elevator. Today you're going to make a document that you send them an RFP, and then they respond, and then they give you a model, and then they come and implement it or deliver it. But you lose a lot of valuable data that you could capture at that point about that particular elevator model. It could be specification data of the actual chosen model that they're going to deliver, but also underlying documents, certificates, maintenance manuals, and others that the supplier has and that he would ship around with an email, when you can actually attach it to the asset in the digital twin. So just the process of doing tendering using the digital twin, sending a link to the supplier where they see exactly the context of that particular asset with the design specs that have been put in there by MEP designers. And then in the other way around, capturing specification data and documents from that supplier into the digital twin is a much more interactive way of working, and it actually makes your digital twin richer at the source of the data, which is the key. I talked earlier about the data loss. That's typically an example of a risk of losing data if you just send that in an email or put it on some document sharing site, which you then forget when the building is actually delivered. And so attaching it directly into the digital twin at that time is a very valuable best practice. Another one is what I hinted at earlier, is to really look at long-term maintenance implications of your design choices, and what we call designing for total costs, not just designing for construction costs, but actually looking at the total lifecycle cost. In many cases, people say, well, maintenance is X% of the construction costs. That is a very high-level thing that's not really driven by a lot of design-specific decisions. If you can actually say, we're going to reduce the number of sprinklers, or we're going to change the type of sprinkler, what does that mean in terms of the purchase cost, installation cost, but also what does that mean in terms of maintenance cost over the next 30 years? Well, if you have designed your digital twin according to certain standards, then you can actually pump it into a maintenance budgeting tool, for example, the one that we as Spacewell provide, to give you an estimate of the next 30 years maintenance budget, and even do an entire maintenance plan if you wanted to go to that level. Obviously, during construction, you don't need that maintenance plan, but when you're done and you hand it over, then you can actually push the button and create your full 30-year maintenance plan down to the work order by leveraging the digital twin during design. Now, you're going to say, well, what kinds of standards do you need to do that? Yeah, there is no one big standard that is globally adopted yet, but there are national standards, say asset management standards that you can apply, and then a library of maintenance costs are linked to that, so you can actually convert your asset register from your digital twin into a maintenance plan budget. It requires a bit of discipline, and so it's important that at the start of a new construction project that you agree on the BIM protocol, what type of classifications you want to do for every asset. That's an important one. We typically impose a certain facility management codification, just a classification of your assets, and then also specific design specifications of certain assets. Say when you're talking about an air compressor, what are the key specification data that you need in order to better estimate and plan for maintenance? And so you just need to impose that in a BIM protocol. It's not a super heavy overload, but it's important to agree on in the beginning so that your maintenance can be a factor in your design choices. And then it's also much easier to manage afterwards. If we go on, then you have the smart maintenance. That's once you're in the maintenance phase, to do your maintenance planning preparation in a much smarter way. You already have your normalized asset register, which is what I talked about earlier, codified according to a certain standard linked to a maintenance budget and plan. And then when you actually need to do interventions, you'll have the opportunity to do maintenance preparation using the digital twin. And when you have kept it up to date throughout the life cycle, it's so much easier to say, well, we're going to go send somebody on site in this building. I don't have to physically be in the building to prepare it, to better plan for it, to better give instructions for it, because I know the exact type, but I also have all the supplier data, I have the supplier documents, I can look at the particular context of that asset before sending a team on site. It saves on money to prepare back and forth trips, and you can be much more efficient that way. Obviously, if you start linking it to BMS system, to added IoT sensors that are either in the asset or in the building, then you can do maintenance in an even smarter way by being more predictive around it. And that's obviously another thing that probably deserves another entire session on PropTech Online. Then you have the smart workplace, is where you really deploy sensors that are about occupancy, comfort, temperature, humidity, CO2. They can deploy in the workplace to really check whether the building is being used in a way it was intended for, in terms of occupancy rate and compliance and well-being. Obviously, in times of COVID, that is even more important when building managers are trying to understand, either during this COVID phase or later, God willing, that we all get our vaccines, that you can actually try to better understand how people are coming back to the office or to the university or to the hospital, and really adapt the space to the real use based on people's behavior. Another aspect that's important in the COVID times is obviously the air refreshing, the refresh rate, which you can do by monitoring CO2 levels, is something that we're getting a lot of questions around, to really make sure that you have well-being assured and that you're compliant in providing an optimal workplace. And the last point is around property management. You can actually use the digital twin to showcase the building to future tenants that maybe want to know what kind of utilities and physical surroundings they would get into before they even go on site. Allows you to visit the space in a virtual way. And you can actually, during occupation, capture feedback in it, so that when you're launching that refurbishment project down the line 3 or 5 years from now, that you can capture all this feedback in the digital twin, so that your project is even more impactful when you're doing the refurbishment. So those are some of the key things that we are doing as Spacewell with our clients, to attach information at different stages of the life cycle into the digital twin, so that you're doing better collaboration, earlier on feedback, which is cheaper to adjust, doing the right design decisions, thinking about the whole life cycle, and being smarter about the way you're doing maintenance, occupying the space, and managing your occupiers. As Nemetschek, we have solutions covering all these components. We're also open to other solutions. Of course, we work a lot with others as well. And so it's really about an open ecosystem that can address different components of it. So you don't necessarily have to do the entire digital twin with one supplier, one software supplier. Obviously, we would love that as Nemetschek, but it's not. We know that that's not the reality. People use different tools at different stages. The key is to have that asset information model in the middle that can collaborate with all of it, which is our approach to it. Here's some examples of some of those smart building solutions that I talked about to either monitor the space and comfort in the space, to optimize the user experience by giving tools to the end user, or giving tools to the cleaners or maintenance team to really leverage that digital twin information packaged in a way that is easy to use for them. This is an example of a building that is being built like this. It's in Antwerp here in Belgium, where that collaboration between design, construction, supplier, and maintenance and occupier is happening from the very first day of the design, which is making it much more a practical example of how the digital twin is enriching each one of those stages. So this is, in a nutshell, what I wanted to share with you. Hopefully some of these things are enlightening you on how the digital twin can really benefit each of the stages of the life cycle. And I'm obviously available for any questions that you may have, either in the chat right now or always offline. You can always ping me on LinkedIn as well, at Spacewell. So maybe Derek, I don't know if you have any imminent questions that have come through, or
right now, there's no questions that have come through in the chat box. Attendees to the session, please, if you have any questions or comments, please write them on your right-hand side in the chat box for Stephen. We'll be here, or then also after this session, there is a further networking and discussion session. If you look on the left-hand side of your panel, the sessions button, if you click that, then you can go into the breakout session to continue the discussion, or to share your video and audio and have a chat with Stephen and ask him the questions that you may have. While we wait for someone to write a question in the chat session here, Stephen, for a minute or two, I did have one question that I wanted to ask you. So, looking at the idea of the digital twin, it's something which we're seeing a lot of information about. It's something which has been, I would say, developing for several years now, starting with kind of the basic idea of a BIM model and then building on top of that layer on layer. BIM models have been around for a while. They haven't caught on quite as quickly, I would think, as was initially hoped. In looking at the successes you've had with the digital twin, what are some of the challenges that you've come across on why some clients might be hesitant to invest in a digital twin? And then how have you addressed those?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Actually, the question I would say that's on everybody's mind. I think the problem has been historically that people see BIM as an overhead, right? As a burden, as extra work that the designers have to do, or extra things that the construction company has to keep track of. If you see it as, bureaucracy and administration, then yes, I can understand that people are hesitant about it, right? And so some of the things that we need to do to address it, and that's what I wanted to share here today, is you have to create what we call the killer app, right? The app that really makes it so useful that it becomes obvious that you need to do it. It's like with everything, right? You need to see that big benefit. And it's kind of enlightening to see when you talk to architects or structural engineers or construction firms who have been doing BIM for many years because they had to, because the client asked for it. When you start to tell them, hey, with a little bit of discipline in the way you classify and capture information, you can also get benefit from it. It's not just for the guys downstream. You can also get benefits from it. Either making better design decisions early on, or better feedback from the construction site, or thinking about maintenance in your design decisions. And by educating them on that, they actually see the light. And then the extra burden of being a bit disciplined about the way you're setting up your BIM model becomes a no-brainer. And it's the killer app is slightly different depending on who you talk to, right? If you're talking to a construction firm, just being able to capture documents from suppliers, they think it's fantastic, right? Which I was like, oh, is that your big thing? Well, yes, it's a big thing because they have so many suppliers, so many components, so many assets, that just by capturing that into the digital twin in a streamlined way is a huge benefit for them. It takes a lot of burden away. That's their killer app, right? If you're doing an HVAC system and you can actually think about the third-year maintenance cost, the real maintenance cost based on the choices that you're making, that is so much more interesting for them than to say, well, I'm going to design it this way and kind of fingers crossed, hope for the best, and I think maintenance will be about 30%, whatever.
Yeah.
and it's by giving them that killer app, if you will, which can be sometimes in the little things that make their life so much easier, then it becomes like a no-brainer that you do it. So I think that's really it, right? If you just do BIM for administration purposes, don't even bother because it's a burden. If you do it by giving every player, every stakeholder their little killer app along the way, then everybody wins.
Yeah, and also it places all the information for a particular building in one location so that you don't run into the kind of handoff communication lags where you're going from design to construction, construction to owner, and then owner to facility managers, and sometimes multiple facility managers down the road, where no one really has a full, complete picture of what's happening in the building at any one time, because the information is kind of piecemeal and siloed in different locations, in different areas.
Yeah, exactly.